So not only do we have public production and private consumption, capitalism is also very inefficient. It is actually very inefficient for people to live in single households where 2, 3, 4, 5 people reside within one household, and they cook for themselves, clean for themselves, and do all of these things individually. This is not a very efficient way of approaching life, because if you've ever taken care of yourself, you've probably noticed that it takes a long time for you to cook and clean and do all of this on top of a job. And of course, the modern dream, is a nuclear family, right? Where a wife takes care of the household and the husband is the breadwinner. But this only worked for a very, very short period of time, and only because the USA was taking advantage of the rest of the world to provide for their own people for a very short period of time. It was what, the 50s, the 60s, and then very quickly the newer generations, they're not even able to afford such luxuries as having one person work in a household. But that has never been the way people lived. People have always lived in larger groups. And I'm not even talking about any kind of noble savage myths. What I'm talking about is that if you think about the efficiency, it is much more convenient and much more useful to just cook, for example, for a bigger group of people, and then preserve that food so that everybody can have access to this food for some time. Cooking every single day from scratch, this is a strange, bizarre thing that only aristocrats in the past could afford, but nowadays is seen as the golden standard. But the amount of ways people have learned to preserve food actually points out to the fact that we were pretty efficient before at preparing our food. We knew that cooking every single day was a huge waste of energy and resources. And of course, still, even if you have a lot of pickled goods and a lot of preserved foods, you still need to do something to them, right? You need to cut some meats up or some cheeses up. You need to probably prepare a certain kind of a meal combining all of these preserved or pickled ingredients. But still, it is not as time consuming to prepare such meals if you compare from cooking from scratch. And again, I don't really cook, my husband does, but by observing my husband cook, I see how much time and energy it actually takes. And my husband also worked professionally in different kitchens. And it is very energy consuming. It is not only energy consuming from the labor part, it is also very energy consuming from the water, electricity, power. All kinds of things are not being saved if you just cook individual meals for individual people. When in fact, the ideas of stolovayas or canteens, like we had in the Soviet Union, is a much more energy efficient and time conserving type of a strategy, where you have specialized centers where people who are professionally trained and who love cooking, they prepare all kinds of meals, they plan for all kinds of meals, and then these meals are available throughout the day. Usually there is a lunch rush, there is a dinner rush, maybe there is a breakfast rush, even though breakfasts are not as popular amongst the modern population. But anyway, so the people working at such public kitchens or canteens were able to provide a lot of people with fresh meals because they had access to equipment. They had access to these large, very well-equipped kitchens, and this makes a big difference. So again, my husband worked in more professional kitchens, and when you have huge fridges, when you have those huge ovens, those huge cooking utensils and everything, those giant pots, you're able to, in the same amount of time you would be serving 2-3 people, you can also serve more people. You can serve up to 10 people in the same giant pot. You can just double up on the ingredients. And of course, it's not easy to do that, doing all the cutting, all the preparation of the food. But still, when you create something in bulk, this is going to save you some time. Yes, maybe you will spend 2-3 hours doing that, but then all of these other people who are going to consume this food that you prepared, they're not going to spend that 1 hour that they would otherwise be spending on cooking for themselves and maybe a couple of people in their household. So the idea of canteens or stolovaya were very popular in the USSR, and the dream was actually that nobody would have to cook individually on their own in their their own little houses or apartments. Everybody would have access to all kinds of canteens or public kitchens where people would cook large communal meals and just come in and eat the food and enjoy the company of each other. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, why in a lot of the Soviet apartments, the kitchens are very small, because you were not meant to cook a lot of meals in those kitchens. You were meant to go to all those public kitchens, and they even had a name for this. They called it Fabrika Kuchnia, which means like a factory kitchen, meaning that it would be like a conveyor belt giving out meals, right? And I know it also sounds a little bit dystopian, but that was the plan for the socialist period, right? Before we had created all of that time-saving technology, all of those robots that will be able to cook and clean for us. That was ultimately the goal, to create the kind of technologies that are going to save us from doing boring, tedious tasks like cutting up vegetables and mixing them all up in a pot for some kind of soup or a stew. But anyway, this first step of creating more public kitchens was already a very, very energy efficient, time efficient type of an idea. And this is just in the area of cooking. If you think of all the other areas, like clothes, we're able to nowadays produce an exorbitant amount of clothes and all kinds of goods and necessities in a very short period of time. That is not good. This is usually because a lot of workers in the textile industries are put under a lot of stress. They are pushed to sew and to create things faster and faster and faster. And of course, it is not great. It is a very tough kind of a job, as far as I could gather from listening to textile workers, etc. But the technologies are there, and we don't need to be making as much as we now make, but we have the means to actually provide people with all of those simple necessities, with all the necessary clothes and all kinds of stuff like chairs and whatnot. We have the means to do that already, and we don't need to be pumping out new stuff all the time, obviously. And we only do that for the sake of profit. We only do that because capitalists need to continuously expand. It is the law of capitalism, continuous, never-ending expansion, which is, of course, not possible on a planet with finite resources. But capitalists, they don't have a long-term plan. They're very narrow-minded. They only have tunnel vision. They are, here's the goal. My goal is to increase the profits in such and such manner, and that's it. There is no other reason, really. And they compete with the other businesses until, of course, monopolization happens. Because they're forced to compete, or otherwise they're going to be pushed out of the market. They're going to be pushed out by their competitors, and they're going to go bankrupt. This is why a lot of small businesses go out of business very quickly too. And if they are successful, they're usually going to be bought by a bigger entity, a bigger business, or forced into submitting to this bigger business's demand. And this has happened time and time again. It has never been done ethically or in good nature. The people who were forced to sell their business or give up their business, more often than not, they did not do that willingly. They were given very compelling reasons, and I'm not talking about money. But so the production of all kinds of necessities can be done very effectively if, again, we bear in mind the reason behind why we produce something. And again, the causes for production, they're going to dictate the process of production. So yes, if we do start building socialist projects, a lot of goods will take more time to produce because people are not going to be exploited. People are going to be given the time and the space to produce everything in a much more realistic time frame. But ultimately, it's going to save everyone time and energy because people are not going to be pushed to consume as much because they're not going to have as much available. And I'm not talking about artificial scarcity. I'm talking, or scarcity, how some people say. I'm talking about the fact that people are going to see that they are the ones creating stuff for themselves. And they're going to think twice. Do I really need to make more of X stuff so that I personally can have more of that stuff? Or would I rather go swimming with my buddies after a shift at my factory? Or would I rather do something more useful that I personally enjoy, or whatever? You get the gist. So the production under socialism, because it's going to have different goals and a different overall organization, because again, the means of production are going to belong to the people. It is not like it's going to belong to the government necessarily. There were co-ops in the USSR. There are still co-ops all over the world. They are not necessarily a sign of socialism. capitalism, but they're one of the ways production can be operated. So when you think about how much we could save of energy, of our own life force, of electricity, of water, of all of those resources that are not infinite, if we were to build socialist projects, it's just astounding. And when you look at the capitalist production, you're just flabbergasted at the inefficiency. You're flabbergasted at how wasteful all of this production is. And again, we as personal individual consumers should not preoccupy ourselves too much with our personal consumption. Of course, if we notice a pattern that we pile up on all kinds of stuff that goes to waste later on, we don't get use out of it. Of course, we've got to be mindful of that. But we shouldn't preoccupy ourselves with always getting the most ethical and the most environmentally friendly type of a thing, because again, unless billions of us do that every single day, it's probably not going to make that big of a difference. And of course, if the production continues in the capitalist manner, nothing is going to ultimately change. Even if large communes of people stop participating in the capitalist production, it is still going to be dominating. So the vast majority of the people have to give up on the type of production, because again, production necessitates consumption. We consume the way we do, not because we're bad, evil people. We consume the way we do because the productive forces, the material circumstances, they literally push us to act in a certain way. Because if you go to the store and you see all of that variety, you're not all of a sudden going to just get one thing and one thing only and just go home. Sometimes, yes, sometimes maybe you will, and oftentimes people do use their willpower to consume less. But again, when it is not going to be convenient for you, when you will feel sick, when you will not feel well, etc., you're going to unfortunately continue grabbing more items, and so do other people. They're pushed by these material circumstances to participate in this consumerist rampage, and this is not up to individuals to fix. It is a systemic issue that has to be addressed communally, collectively. Otherwise, we're going to just continue making the same mistakes we already did in the past. So, of course, all of you already know all of this, and this is just a rant. So I hope you have a great day today. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the other social medias, even though I don't do anything there, and I'll talk to you sometime later.